Meanwhile, the Border Management Authority and stakeholders operating at the Sunny Pass, Boermans Neck, as well as Mononja ports of entry have shut down operations until further notice. Well, this is due to persistent snowfall, which is at least 6 centimeters deep. The BMA says conditions leading to Lesotho have now become hazardous. Travelers are also advised to use the Vicksburg Port, Kelden, Spoort and Makaleng, as well as Maseru ports of entry as alternatives. All right, we have also roped in climate expert Professor Patrick Bond. He is the Professor of Sociology and Political Ecology at the University of Johannesburg to help us further understand what we are currently experiencing as far as weather patterns are concerned at this time of the year. Prof, always good having you with us. A very good afternoon to you. So, we're currently grappling, of course, with icy weather in parts of the country. The UNGA is currently set to take place as from tomorrow in the US with a special focus on climate change. So what should the African agenda include in their presentation when looking at how our weather patterns have actually become frequently destructive and often unpredictable, Prof?
Yes, that's right, Alicia. Thanks for having me. Greetings to the viewers. Look, it's a disastrous situation insofar as 2024 is the hottest year ever recorded. Last year was also the prior hottest year. And these signals and the United Nations report showing we're on target for a 3 degrees centigrade increase in the current century. That's double what the 1.5 degree Paris Climate Agreement said would be the safe level that we could relatively easily adapt to. But we're already roughly at 1.5. We'll be there within about 3 or 4 years. And the dilemma is, as we've seen here today, in the inability of our emergency services to deal with the extreme weather and the cold spell that's leaving everyone unprepared, is our adaptation, our resilience, our climate proofing isn't nearly where it should be at this stage.
And speaking of that, I mean, Prof, snowfall has been reported along the N3 leading to a shutdown of the road as well as parts of it. I've never actually seen a snowplow truck as something that is readily on standby, especially on major roads in the country. So we really need to start focusing on infrastructure as well as mitigate for these extreme type weather patterns that were not so common before. So what does that look like for South Africa from insurance to spatial planning?
Well, in addition to the emergency services, the most crucial, obvious shortcomings have been in stormwater drainage and pumping on the one hand. And as we saw especially in Cape Town over the last few weeks, there are some low-lying areas where shack settlements have emerged, especially during the COVID sort of emergency period. And they haven't been properly prepared for the flooding. And secondly, we saw some dams collapsing. The worst case of this was in Libya just over a year ago, where more than 20,000 people were killed. But we also saw another dam collapse in Nigeria last week, where more than 1 million people were displaced. Now, these reflect, again, lack of infrastructure financing. And many African countries, we have to include South Africa, are under fiscal stress. In many cases, the International Monetary Fund, including in South Africa, have got some restrictions on what the fiscal, let's say, generosity or basic common sense preparations can afford. And so unfortunately, the IMF, even though it's probably the most aware of these international financial and trade agencies about the damages of climate, they're putting roughly $63 a ton. Now, the United States economists have actually said it should be over $1,000 a ton. The World Economic Forum has endorsed that. So I think we really need to look at what's called loss and damage and the social cost of carbon, and whether we're putting enough into our budgets so that the standard, what's called polluter pays, let's say contingency will be there. And we're not doing that. I mean, South Africa's carbon tax is at 38 cents a ton. As I say, the social cost of carbon, where we really should be budgeting if we were to sort of even out the costs of the damage being done when we emit a ton of carbon, should be over $1,000 or roughly 18,000 rand a ton. So this is a really big gap. And as Business Day reported yesterday, the European Union will put on carbon taxes to try to, let's say, make that gap between what we're paying as our carbon tax, very, very low, 38 US cents a ton, and what they're paying, about $70 a ton, and make the difference so that the, let's say, cheating by importing South African steel and aluminium and petrochems doesn't then adversely affect the European climate strategy. And these are the big problems that I think will affect not just our preparedness for climate, but our whole economy for decades to come.
Quite concerning indeed there, Prof. So why do you think we're experiencing such extreme weather, especially when people are saying it's dead smack in the middle of spring, Professor? Should we be worried? The winter was generally warmer, and you did mention during our earlier discussions that this will be a persistent pattern where seasons seem to look as if they are overlapping. So what do we call this current phenomenon?
Well, I would say lack of awareness of the danger of extreme weather. Now, this particular cold spell may not be attributable to the big, deep climate change, just the way we could say the rain bomb that hit Durban in April 2022 wasn't directly attributable, but I think all the scientists agree the chances of these things happening are much, much higher. We know, for example, when the Mozambique channel, right, between Madagascar and northern Mozambique, when it heats up above 30, which it usually does in February, March, April, well, the cyclones become intense. Cyclones that maybe even start in Australia, as Cyclone Freddy did last year, come all the way to Mozambique. And then as they go inland, they actually come back again to gather more heat and more energy from this hot Mozambique channel. Now, that heat will start to move increasingly south. So I suspect the cyclones, which kind of, they kind of hit the Malawian and Zimbabwean mountain change on the border, those will then start to not only bounce back and gather more steam, as we've seen since 2019, Cyclone Idai, Cyclone Kenneth, but they'll also start coming into Limpopo and in Mpumalanga. We've had some early indications. So let's say that our awareness has to increase. And also this week, the HSRC, Human Sciences Research Council, as well as the Presidential Climate Commission, issued a report saying we're really unprepared in our mentality to address the climate catastrophe, both to lower our own emissions and to be prepared for extreme weather. So I hope the media does these sorts of reports, Alicia, more frequently to alert people that this is a very profound, probably our existential crisis, especially if we do hit the 3-degree mark by the end of the century. Much of the planet will be unlivable.
It says here, weather-related hazards put about 20 billion rands worth of transport infrastructure at risk. So it's quite a worrying factor, that one, Professor. Thank you so much for your input, as always, Professor Patrick Bond, the UJ Professor of Sociology, on the latest inclement weather patterns.